Flightless Bird has deleted her account. However, I'm getting a ton of comments that are along the same vein as this comment, saying things like, the fact that people are upset at her in the first place shows that they have a lack of social media literacy and they develop parasocial relationships too quickly, and it's concerning. It's concerning that people are saying that they're staying up like they couldn't fall asleep because they were so worried about her and her kids. That shows that they don't have good boundaries and they're incapable of having healthy relationships online. I am so glad that none of you have experienced PTSD before, because otherwise you wouldn't be responding this way. And I hope that you never have to experience it, but you're confusing what's called an emotional flashback with parasocial relationships, and those two things are very different. So let me explain, please. So a key thing here that makes this different than just a typical parasocial relationship is the fact that she made it seem like it was an active crisis. It being an active crisis meant that it wasn't just an adult that was in danger, but her children were actively in danger. And so as she was describing this, people who heard it, who had been previously victims in similar circumstances or situations, it bypasses consent as to whether or not they want to choose to engage with it. Because the normal human thing to do when you hear that somebody is going through a horrific circumstance and needs help is to listen to that person and offer help if you can, because that's called having empathy, and that's something that should be praised and celebrated and people should have more of. Clearly, you are lacking in it to an extent. Please don't attack this person though. They're one of many people who have left a comment like this. I'm just frustrated with continuing to have this narrative in my comment sections that is essentially victim blaming. Clearly I'm upset and frustrated by it because I'm flushing. Oddly enough, just on one side of my face though. Whatever. So what happens when she comes on and she says that this is an active crisis? People don't feel like they can just swipe on and choose to engage with it at a later time because she's making it urgent. She is making a false sense of urgency here. And because there's kids involved, obviously people are going to care and people are going to be worried about her and worried about the state of the kids, especially if they have been in this circumstance before. Because how CPTSD works, and in some cases PTSD, is when you have gone through complex trauma like that or a traumatizing event, regardless of how much therapy you do, how much trauma therapy you do to heal the feelings you have around your own experiences, when you are forced to engage with an urgent situation similar to the one that you went through, you are going to be re-traumatized and you're going to go through something called an emotional flashback, which is where your brain cannot use your frontal lobe, cannot access your prefrontal cortex because your cortisol levels shoot through the roof and the decision-making parts of your brain are literally shut off, and your amygdala is the only one that is controlling anything happening. And it starts to draw on the feelings that you had when you were in this prior circumstance yourself, and obviously that makes you feel unsafe. So to the people who are saying that these people need to get a handle on themselves, who were saying they were unable to sleep at night because they were worried about their kid, like the kids and Flightless Bird. They weren't just worried about Flightless Bird and her kids. They obviously were worried about them. But what was happening is they had an emotional flashback where they then also were brought back to the time that they went through this and they felt unsafe. And because of that, like flashback, they have so much cortisol pumping through their system that they cannot quell their own anxiety because it's now been brought back up. Think about people who are veterans. Usually, flashbacks are not like what we think of. Like, the clearest example that people often offer is veterans, when they come home from war, fireworks oftentimes will re-traumatize them or trigger their PTSD. And no matter how much exposure therapy they do or try to heal from the experiences they went through when they were in war, it doesn't mean that another future firework will not still trigger them. It probably will, but it won't happen every time, but it'll happen a lot of times. Most of the time it's not physical like that. Sometimes it can be, but a lot of the times it's just an emotional response. You're not necessarily put back in that scene, you're not necessarily visualizing it. A lot of people do, but a lot of the time it is just your body becomes a state that you cannot control and your amygdala fully takes over. And yes, I think that there could be people who could use some more coping skills for when they get re-triggered or re-traumatized. It is victim blaming to tell them that they shouldn't have been upset in the first place. And it is weird, just straight up weird behavior to be trying to shame people for having empathy, for caring and worrying about the safety of children who are in an unsafe situation. And again, I'm thankful that you have not personally gone through this, so you don't personally know what it's like to be re-traumatized and have the worst parts of your life triggered that way, and feeling like a sense of obligation to prevent anyone else from having to go through the same thing that you went through. Because that's a normal reaction when you have that intensive trauma. I am glad that you have not experienced it and that you cannot relate, and I hope that you never do. But do not shame people for caring for others, for having empathy, and for having to relive the trauma that they went through, that it wasn't their fault in the first place, for having to live through. And understand that the way that she presented it is the problem. That is what makes it different than being a parasocial relationship. I feel like I've rambled for a little bit. I'm a little upset. So if I'm not making much sense, if it's not clear, I apologize. I did my best to explain the differences between them as clearly as I could, because I'm sick of getting comments like this. But if I didn't, whatever, comment, and I'll try to explain it better again once I go take a walk or something, because I need to decompress too.